Joe here with Glass City Candle Company. In today's video, we're going to discuss some of the most common issues we face as candle makers and how to overcome them. To jump right in, one of the first most common issues that we face is soot and smoking while the candle is lit. This can be caused by a number of things. For one, you could be overloading the candle with fragrance oil, meaning you're adding more fragrance oil than the wax can actually bind to. Now, most waxes have a maximum fragrance load of 10%. This means 90% of the candle can be wax and 10% of the candle by weight can be fragrance oil. If you go above this threshold, the candle wax can simply not bind to the fragrance oil. This will cause the fragrance oil to sweat to the surface of the candle and to be burnt off by the flame, creating smoke and soot. How you remedy this is you ensure that you're using the proper ratios. So how you find those is you check on the manufacturer's website of the type of wax that you're using. So wherever you're buying the wax from, if you're ordering from Candle Science, when you actually go to the product description, it should tell you the recommended maximum fragrance load that you can do with this wax type. Make sure that you're within those boundaries and you should be golden. Another common cause for soot and smoking in your candle is over-wicking your candle, which means using a wick that is too large for the size vessel that you chose. Now, wick sizes go off of the diameter of the vessel. They don't go off of 8 ounces, 16 ounces, or anything like that. They go off of the diameter of the vessel. So if you're using a wick that's meant for a larger diameter vessel than you're using, then it's going to be burning hotter than the wick that you should be using on your jar. Now, when you have a wick that's burning hotter than it should be, it's going to create smoke and soot. The reason it creates the smoke and soot is because it's consuming the wax at a higher rate than it can actually burn it. And so what's the excess wax winds up coming up in soot and smoke and carbon buildup. So how you avoid that is within the same series of wicks that you're using, you wick down. Wicking down just means going one wick size down in the series of wicks that you're using. For instance, I use the Eco series of wicks. That's what I use for most of my candles. Now, if I were using the Eco 8 and it was causing soot and smoke to happen, I would likely try to wick down to the Eco 6. If that fixes my issue, great. If it doesn't, then I'm going to have to try wicking down again or trying out a different series of wicks. One of the last reasons that you're going to have sooting and smoking is from not trimming your wick to 1/4 inch before each burn. When you have a wick and you don't trim it to 1/4 inch and it's longer than 1/4 inch, the flame is going to be too tall and it's going to burn too hot, and you're going to have the same issue you had with over wicking. So make sure that your wick before every single burn is trimmed to 1/4 inch. The next issue we're going to discuss is tunneling and the wick drowning itself out and putting the flame out. Tunneling is essentially when you have the candle and it starts to burn straight down. It doesn't reach a full melt pool, it only burns a small circle and goes straight down. As it burns down and creates a little hole, the wax on the sides of the jars starts to melt, filling in that hole, burying the wick, and putting out the flame, rendering the candle useless. This can be caused by under-wicking the candle. When you use too small of a wick, like I said earlier, it goes off the diameter. So if you're using a wick that is meant for a smaller diameter vessel than what you're using, it can only burn that diameter. So let's say your vessel is this big, but you're using a wick that can only burn this big. You're going to have a tunnel starting at this size, burning straight down. When you have that issue, again, that excess wax on the sides is going to melt and pool in around your wick and is going to put it out. One of the most common reasons for tunneling is actually based on your first burn. So wax has memory, meaning when you burn it that first time, if it doesn't reach a full melt pool and there's excess wax left over, that new ring that you formed is as far as your next burn can go. And again, you're going to have that issue. That excess wax on the sides, as it keeps going down and down, that excess wax is going to melt, fill in the space around your wick, and drown it. Now, a common reason for your wick drowning itself is using additives that aren't approved for candle use. Common additives that people use include mica powders, other cosmetic colorants, crayons, glitter, sprinkles, and botanicals. These kind of additives aren't meant for candle making, and it can clog up the wick and cause the wick to stop burning completely, and you won't be able to relight it. So it's essential that you're using only candle-approved materials for making candles. If you use any kind of non-candle approved material, you're going to have burn problems. If your testing goes just fine using it, I promise you, down the line you're going to have a customer that has problems with the burning. It's an inevitable problem waiting to happen. The next issue we're going to touch on is mushrooming. Mushrooming is essentially little black balls of carbon buildup that form on the tip of your wick, and it kind of forms a mushroom-like shape. Mushrooming has several causes, but the number one reason, your candle's burning too hot. Now, it could be burning too hot because you've overwicked it, or it could be burning too hot because you haven't trimmed the wick. It's essential that you're using the correct wick size for your vessel and for your type of wax. If you're overwicked, like I said earlier, the flame is actually going to consume more wax than it can burn off, and that excess wax that's consumed will come about in the form of carbon buildup on the tip of your wick, soot and smoke. If you're not trimming your wick properly, carbon buildup happens naturally. It happens on everybody's candles. That's why your wick is black at the end of every burn. We normally trim the wick. When you're not trimming off that excess carbon in between each burns and shortening your wick to shorten the flame, it's going to be a compounding issue with more and more carbon buildup forming with each burn. Carbon buildup is especially dangerous because those little black balls of carbon are flammable. Now, when it's attached to your wick, that just means you're going to have a bigger and bigger flame as it builds up more and more. The more it builds up, the hotter your flame's going to burn. Now, those little balls of carbon can actually break off of your wick while it's lit. If you're lucky, it'll land in your melt pool and it will actually put itself out. If you're not as lucky, it can land in a dry spot of your wax, and the flame from that little ball of carbon can combine with the flame of your wick, form a bigger flame, form a hotter fire, and it increases your risk of an uncontrolled fire within your candle. If you're less lucky than that, then the little carbon buildup can actually break off onto somebody's table, onto somebody's floor, a number of things, and it can create a house fire. Obviously, that's not why we're in this business, and that's a large lawsuit waiting to happen, not to mention the loss of property, the loss of life potentially. It's essential that you're testing your wicks. Moving on to our next issue is having little to no scent while burning your candle. This is a very frustrating issue for a lot of us because you spend all this time making this beautiful candle and it smells so good fresh out of the jar once it's finally cured. You've waited all this time to finally get to burn it, you light it, and it does not throw scent at all. You cannot smell it when it's lit. This is so frustrating because the materials we use, it's expensive, and the time we put into it, it's just heartbreaking when you don't get the results that you're looking for. The main cause of having too little scent when you light your candle is that you may not be using enough fragrance oil. Now again, I want you to refer to the manufacturer recommendations. So wherever you buy that wax from, it should tell you the maximum fragrance load of that wax. Make sure you're within those boundaries, but if you're below that, some scents are weaker than others and you may need to go up in scent. Now, if you're using the maximum load that you can and you still cannot smell it, then the issue may be in your wick. If you're not able to smell it and you're experiencing other symptoms of poor burning, like tunneling especially, then you may be underwicked and you may need to wick up in order to be able to smell this scent. Now, fragrance oils with a higher vanillin content, you'll likely have to wick up for anyways because they do change the burning qualities of your wax, and I tend to find I need to wick up for any scent with a higher vanillin content. The last kind of issue that might cause a poor hot throw is if you're adding your fragrance oil at too hot of a temperature. So again, you'll have to refer to your manufacturer recommendations for your wax type, but for IGI 606, which is what I use, I like to add my fragrance oil no higher than 170 to 175 degrees Fahrenheit. For your wax type, it may be a little bit different, but that's the guideline I go for my wax type. When you add your fragrance oil at too high of a temperature, it can evaporate some of the scent off. When that happens, you're essentially pouring in your fragrance oil, and it's for nothing because as soon as it hits that hot wax, the scent goes away. Now, you'll want to loosely refer to the flash point listed on your fragrance oil bottle. While this doesn't refer to the temperature at which it will evaporate, it does refer to the temperature at which it will ignite while exposed to an open flame. This is important because you can kind of use that as a guideline as to when you should be adding your fragrance oil. If you have a fragrance oil with a lower flash point, chances are you need to be making sure that you're adding it at a lower temperature than you normally would. This can help improve your hot throw because it decreases the likelihood of any of that scent burning off. On to our last issue for the day. Jump lines, frosting, and wet spots. What are they? Jump lines are essentially little horizontal bands around the perimeter of your candle. Those show different distinct layers, and those layers show different levels of cooling. The main causes of jump lines is that you're not preheating your vessel before you're pouring. As soon as you start pouring your wax out of your melting pitcher, it's going to cool down drastically. If you're pouring hot wax into a cold jar, as soon as it hits the sides of that cold glass, it's going to start to harden almost immediately. Now, the problem with that is you form this little layer of hardened wax around your jar, and as the heat of the melted wax slowly heats up the jar, that little bit of wax can kind of remelt a little bit, and it starts to form different temperatures within the wax, and so it'll cool. Those different temperatures will cool in distinct layers. When that happens, you get those little jump lines. How you fix this is you make sure that you preheat your vessel before you pour, and you also make sure that you're insulating your vessel to slow down the cooling process. Slowing down the cooling process ensures proper time for the wax to adhere to the glass, and it also ensures even cooling throughout the entire candle. As I said earlier, I do have a video on this. It's my tinfoil method, and I will be linking that down below in the description as well as the comments. This method has helped me a lot and has helped some others with solving a lot of these common issues. Frosting. Frosting is the crystallization of soy waxes. It forms kind of like a spider web type pattern throughout the perimeter of your candle. Unfortunately, the crystallization process is normal for natural waxes such as soy wax. Now, there are ways that you can kind of minimize this issue, but it's an issue that's normal for soy waxes that you cannot fully eradicate. Just like the jump lines, you can kind of remedy this by making sure you preheat your vessels, making sure that you're insulating your vessels to slow down the cooling process, and you can also benefit from pouring your wax at a cooler temperature into your vessel. Obviously, you'll need to do some experimentation to find what works best for you, but that's going to give you the best foundation to avoid as much frosting as you would had you not used those methods. Now, some buyers do actually look for frosting when they're buying a natural soy candle, because it is a natural process of the wax and it shows that it's authentic to those customers. For the most part, frosting is mainly an issue that we have because we're the ones who made it and we want it to look as smooth and beautiful as possible. Frosting doesn't affect the way your candle will burn, it only affects the looks, and like I said, that's kind of something people look for when buying natural soy wax candles. The last thing, wet spots. What are those? Wet spots, when you're looking around the perimeter of your candles, sometimes you'll notice little areas that look like pockets of air. Now, those areas are called wet spots, and what those are essentially is areas where the wax hasn't adhered to the jar. Now, wet spots, they're not avoidable. They can come at any point of your candle's life, from the day you make it to the day it has its last burn. All it takes is a slight shift in weather, a little cold draft, anything like that, and wet spots will appear. There are a number of things you can do to prevent it for your first cure, which would be, again, using the tinfoil method and insulating the jar, heating the jar, those kind of things to make sure that it's cooling slower and more evenly. The last thing that you can do if wet spots are already present on your candle and you're about to present it to somebody, if you don't like the looks of it and you just want it to look a little bit better for yourself, you can use a heat gun and you can run it along the perimeter of the jar and you can slowly remelt the sides of your candles and it will fill in those little gaps. The only thing is that you can't really fix it because it will come back eventually. It's not something you can avoid. It's not something your customers will notice or care about. and I'm almost willing to bet that none of us cared about it or even noticed it before we started making candles, because I know that I never did, and I used to buy a lot of candles before I started making them myself. That'll wrap up our video for today. If you enjoyed what you saw, feel free to leave me a comment down below letting me know what you thought. If you have any questions or suggestions, I would also welcome those in the comments. I love hearing from you guys and responding to you and interacting with you guys. Also, feel free to subscribe if you haven't already, because we're planning on putting out videos weekly now that the holidays are over and all this craziness is over. So hopefully we'll be getting into the studio weekly to post videos for you guys and continue to help you. So thanks for watching, and you guys have a great day.